So I've created a few tutorials about painting people in this cute style, and I think it's time for me to focus on the face and share 3 key things that really helped me improve these. The first key thing I want to explain is shading, and it's really important, but in a lot of my other tutorials, I just sort of quickly gloss over it and I don't go into a lot of detail. So one of the first kind of shadows I actually like to add is around the eyes. So if I open up my layers panel, the eyes here are on this face layer, and to add a shadow around the eyes, I'll use the freehand selection tool, and I'll just select a kind of crescent shaped portion on the top of each eye. Then I'll go to hue, saturation, and brightness, and I'll just lower it basically just to 49, so I'm just lowering it like 1%. And it might not show up clearly on the camera because the contrast can be a little bit high, but I can see a very subtle shadow on the top of the eye, and definitely improves the look. The next shadow I like to add is behind the eyes. So if I open the layers panel, here's the face layer. All the way back here is the actual skin tone layer, so from now on, all the shadows need to be done on this layer. What I do is I'll use the selection tool set to freehand, and I'll make a circular selection just like that. It's not exactly centered on the eye, it's just a little bit moved down. Then I'll feather both of those out a little bit. Hue, saturation, and brightness. And you've probably noticed this, but if you just darken the skin tone, it ends up looking a little bit washed out or desaturated. And that's a big problem with skin tones because when they look desaturated, they kind of look a little bit dead. So not only should you darken it just a little bit, it also helps if you saturate it and then maybe shift the hue a little bit towards purple or something. And this is just a subtle thing that gives this face a 3-dimensional look around the eyes without making it look washed out. The next thing I like to do is add a T-shaped shadow, and I think I've covered this clearly in my videos, but I'll explain it again here. So I just make a selection like that, I'll feather it out quite a bit, hue, saturation, and brightness, and I'll just brighten it a tiny bit. And this increases the contrast, but again, it's still a pretty subtle change. I also like to add a shadow under the neck. So again, I'll use the freehand selection tool. And I never like to do like hard lines on the neck area. I prefer it if it's pretty smooth. So I'm going to feather out this selection quite a bit. And just like I did with the eyes, I'll darken it and then saturate it to avoid that kind of washed out look. And then again, I'll shift the hue here a little bit towards purple, just like 1%. And the last shadow I like to add on the face is actually a kind of shadow between the hair and the face. And this might be like a personal kind of stylistic thing, but I'll show you how I do that. So again, I'll use the freehand selection tool. I still have that skin tone layer selected, and I'm just going to select along the edge here and slightly copy the kind of shape of the hair. And it's in 2 parts. I'm going to have to do add and do another one down here. There we go. And then I'm just going to darken these. I won't mess with the hue or saturation. This is a pretty minor shadow, and I think I'll lower it down here to 45%. And this simply makes the kind of boundary between the hair and the face a little bit more interesting. The second key thing with faces is the expression. There are basically 2 ways to add emotional depth to the expression. You can either mess with the mouth or mess with the eyes. And of course, it's ideal to get this right during the sketching process. But if you already have a painting like this that's pretty much done, you can get the same effect with the liquefy tool in Procreate. Now, in order to use that tool, we have to first merge all the face layers onto one. So I'll just pinch them together like that. Then as long as that layer is selected, I can go to my adjustments, liquefy, I'll set the momentum to 0, distortion to 0, pressure at max, and I can adjust the size to whatever I want, and I can just go in there and actually kind of warp and bend these things and kind of imbue the eyes or the mouth with a slightly off or maybe negative expression. I think the main thing to avoid when you're warping your illustration is accidentally twisting the pupils. So in this case, they're sort of like vertical lines. It's really important that they don't accidentally end up like this or like that. It's really better if they're parallel. The third and last kind of key thing I want to mention here is texture contrast. And it's definitely very, very subjective, and it might only apply to this type of painting style. but I really think it's a good idea to add some unusual textures or maybe even a little bit of scribbling where you can get away with it. You can see here that I've done this with the hair. It has all these very faint scribbles in it, and I've also done this with the cheeks as well. And generally, I will try to do this as much as I can without it becoming too distracting. I think it makes the illustration more charming and enhances the handmade and spontaneous feeling of it. Another way to add this kind of texture contrast is to go the opposite direction. So like instead of adding scribbles, you can add a few hard geometric elements like glasses, for example. And if you've ever tried to add glasses to a character and they just end up looking kind of formless, make sure you try to draw them with the shape tool in Procreate, because it's really critical for glasses to be perfectly symmetrical, otherwise they look kind of like drawn or painted on. And that pretty much wraps it up. Be sure to check out this video if you want to start from the beginning and learn how to paint these kind of people. Thanks again for all your support, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.